We're going to our Bible study now, in which we attempt to be inspired and instructed by these scriptures about our particular message for today, which is a message about hope. So what I'm going to do, in the interest of our time together here, I'm going to combine the Bible study and the communion meditation in one thing. So therefore, we won't have to be so repetitive about it. And so we'll do both Bible study and communion meditation together at this time. First of all, we turn over to the book of Jeremiah, one of my favorite books. And unlike the song that used to say Jeremiah was a bullfrog, he was not a bullfrog. He was a prophet of Israel, a young prophet, about 27 or 29, somewhere between 27 and 29 years old. And he'd seen everything bad that had happened. He saw his nation destroyed. He saw his parents and his brothers and sisters put in chains and taken off to this huge nation that had just crushed his nation and destroyed all their hope of ever having a Jewish faith again. He'd seen all of that, and he had gone to Babylon, and he had seen what it was like to live as a slave in Babylon, to have to serve these people who had crushed his nation and destroyed everything that he had believed in. At the young age of 27, 28, or 29, he saw that, and he spoke out about the destruction that he saw and the death that he saw and all the distress that his people had. He understood all of that, and he understood that that was the reason why they suffered was because they had forgotten to have the hope of God in their life. They had turned to an alliance with Egypt. They knew that Assyria was about to destroy their country. And so instead of turning to God and finding out from God how they could maybe save themselves, they made an alliance with Egypt. And of course, that made the Assyrians even more upset with them. And they were totally destroyed. So he understood that all the destruction came from the fact that they did not follow through on what they said their faith was about. But in the midst of all of that, he received a message also of hope. And that's what we're going to look at here today from the 29th chapter of Jeremiah, in which he brings to us this one thought. And I'm only going to read this one thought so that we can get the whole message in this one thought. He went on to talk about how now they were in Babylon and how they were lost from God, and he talks about all of that. But then he makes the proclamation, and you see it here, I will bring you back. I will bring you back. And what he was saying about that was, no matter how lost you might be as a people, no matter how destroyed you might be as a people, no matter how tragic your life has become, no matter how difficult it may be at the current time, the promise of God is, after the darkness, after all of the storm, God has one plan in mind, and that is to bring you back to Him. And that is the idea of Jeremiah, that we are celebrating the power of God to bring us back to be with Him. If you look at your life, as I look at my life, I can see many times that God has brought me back. You know, I was raised in the United Methodist Church. I was the president of the youth ministry there. I did a lot of things as a young person. And even then the pastors told me, they said, you know, with the voice you have, you might one day be a preacher. They said that to me. But I turned against all that after I went to college and learned all kinds of sophisticated ways of thinking. I became an atheist, agnostic first, and then an atheist. I became a philosopher. I became someone who turned against all that the church had ever said or taught or had anything to do with. But God brought me back. You see? And, you know, not just in that instance. I've gone through tragedies. I've gone through difficulties, family problems, all kinds of things that I have suffered. And sometimes when you suffer those things, you kind of lose your hope and you kind of drift away from God and you no longer have anything to do with God, even though you might still believe in God. But every time Our hope is the power of God will bring us back, you see. No one can do that but God. God is the only one that can do that, because God is in control of every experience you have, every circumstance you might face, every situation that occurs in your life. Who can make up life? You can't make up life. None of us can make up life. Life is what God makes it to be, and through whatever it is that God makes it to be, there's one hope that is presented there, and that He will bring you back to Himself, no matter how far you may wander away, you see. So in the season of Advent, when we are anticipating the birth of Christ in the world again and again and again, what we are anticipating is the hope we have, that no matter what our need is right now, and how can we know what everyone's need is? We can't. But one thing we know is you need hope in some way, in some fashion. And whatever way it is that you need hope, God will provide it by bringing you back to Him. That is the truth. Now, that's the Old Testament reading from Jeremiah, and it brings to us this idea that God is a God of hope, and that's what He does over and over again. When life is destroyed, God brings hope to you. Now, we move on to Romans chapter 15, verses 10 through 3. And it has many things in there to say, but the key thing that it has to say is this kind of little benediction that the Apostle Paul puts in there. And he says, "May the God of hope fill you with peace and joy," or fill you with joy and peace. This is something we must understand, is that another part of the hope of God is that we will find joy and peace in life. You know, many people don't find much joy in life, and many people don't find much peace in life. I've been there. I know what that's like. As many of you know, in my latter ministry, I would have to say, in my latter ministry, I left the organized church and started my own evangelical ministry. And in order to earn a living, I became a real estate broker in Houston, Texas. And in that role as the real estate broker, I was very successful. Created a brokerage from 3 agents up to 40 agents. And if you don't know about how you can lose your peace and joy, try to be a broker in charge of 40 real estate agents in Houston, Texas, in the midst of the worst depression we ever saw. Oh, that was a hard time to try to continue to preach faith and to preach the gospel as I did on weekends and Sundays, and wherever I could go, I would preach it, because I earned my living as a real estate broker. And I found myself in many instances losing my peace and losing my joy, because there were so many things to worry about, so many problems to face, so many difficulties that you had when you're in business, you know. There's a lot of things that have to go on, and when you have the weight of 40 some odd agents on your shoulders, and you're trying to survive and make a living for everybody, it really wears you down. And I got worn down trying to run off and preach and come back and counsel and go off here and go off there. It was quite a trying time for me. But then I had a moment with Jesus in which I understood very clearly what He said. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? Oh, that came through me so clear to me. The hope of the Christian life is that we will understand that if we focus only on our worldly needs, if we focus only on what we think we have to do to meet the needs of our physical bodies and our physical world, if we focus only on that, we will never have peace. We will never have any joy. So instead, we must find our hope in the example of Jesus. That's the example we have here today. This is the example that Jesus gives to us. He says, you want to find peace, you want to find joy, then live a life of self-giving sacrifice. That's how you will find peace, and joy. That's the hope you have. And I know that. I have learned that. Back in those days when I would just be so frustrated with all the details of life, I would leave the office, I would get in my car, I would drive down to the Salvation Army office, and I'd spend the rest of the day there feeding those who were hungry and praying for those who were sick in that particular organization. And when I came away from doing that, I had peace and joy beyond all peace and joy. I could go back and face the world and all of its troubles and difficulties. You got to forget yourself. That's what you got to do. Because as long as you're worried about yourself, you've got a lot of things to worry about. But if you're not worried about yourself anymore, you don't have anything to worry about except who you can help and how you can help them and how you can bring some relief to their suffering. And there's nothing more joyful than that and nothing more peaceful than that. And so the blood that we drink here and the body that we eat here reminds us that the suffering, self-sacrificing life lived for others is the only way to ever find peace and joy in this particular world. And then finally, we have this last great statement, which comes from the gospel. And since I'm only focusing upon one verse, we'll forgo the standing up of it. But it's this one statement that is made in the Gospel of John, chapter 6, verse 54. And it is Jesus' promise of the greatest hope that there ever was in this world. And it's a hope that we find in this supper that we're about to partake of. It's the greatest hope you can ever have, but you got to understand what it means when he says, whoever eats my flesh and whoever drinks my blood, he says then, I will raise them up on the last day. Okay, that's what he says. That's the hope of Christ, is that you will be raised up on the last day. But let me tell you something about that. So many people have a very weak and poor idea of what is meant by the last day. Most people think that what is meant by the last day is the end of all reality, the end of the world, the end of everything that there ever was on the final judgment day. That's when they think the last day is. But let me tell you, there are a million last days, and our life is filled with last days. And every last day you have, Jesus comes to raise you up to a higher standard, a higher way of life than you ever had before. You are facing last days every day of your life. You're facing last days. I can remember in my early years when our family would move and we would go from our house that I'd lived in and grown up in for 3 or 4 years, and then we'd move off to another city, another place, and I would spend that last day in my bedroom, and I would remember what it was like, and I would feel sad because it was my last day in that house, you see, moving on to another place. And I can remember having persons in my life that I have loved, my mother, my father, and I can remember when they passed away. And that was the last day I would ever see my mother. That was the last day I would ever see my father. But in that last day, I was raised up to something higher and better than what I had ever experienced before. You see, you got to remember that the promise of the gospel is that whatever last day you're having, whatever it is you're leaving behind, whatever it is that you are losing in your life, whatever it is that you're having to give up that you never wanted to give up, but now you have to give it up, whatever that is, God will use that experience as a way of raising you up to a higher and better and more excellent way of life. It's like the Apostle Paul says, you know, all the things people have believed before Christ starts fine, they can believe as they wish. But let me show you a more excellent way. We're not saying everything that people have ever believed is wrong. We're just saying it's not the most excellent way to look at life or to believe about life. And one of the most excellent things to believe about life is that whatever last day you're going through is only the beginning of a new day and a new life, okay? And that's, of course, ultimately true on the day you die and you no longer are part of this physical world. That's a last day also. And we believe that on that last day you will likewise be raised up into a new life. So The hope of God is this: every day I'm raising you up, because every day is the last day that you will ever have that day. So you have to think about that. And you have to realize that as you walk with God, you're walking up, 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 one last day at a time. So, that then is the Bible study we have for today, and that is our communion meditation here for today. And the message is very simple, that God is a God of hope. You know, we all need things to live on in this world. I can remember, it's a funny thing, but when I was a youth minister, I took a survey of young people at one time, because in those days, we were all fearful of World War III, and that was 50 years ago. But anyway, in those days, we were all fearful about that, and a nuclear attack might happen at any time. And so I asked these young people, I said, write down on a piece of paper, what kind of food would you grab a hold of if you had to run to a bomb shelter? What would you take with you? And of course, they all came up with some of the more common ideas. I'd take some beans. I'd take some rice. And then about 2/3 of them said they would take some Cheetos. We need all kinds of things to live. There's no doubt about that. But the thing that we need more than anything else is hope. Let me tell you, if you don't have hope, it's very hard to keep on living. It's very hard to keep on going. I remember one time when I ran out of gas in my car in the middle of East Texas on one of those roads where there was nothing but cornfields forever and ever and ever. And so I had to walk toward what I would hope to find, a gas station. And I walked and I walked and I walked, hoping that a gas station would show up. And I got real tired and I got real worn out, and I just didn't think I could walk anymore. But then I said to myself, I hope that around the corner there will be a gas station. Hope kept me going. And it was around about the third or fourth corner, but there was a gas station. You see, that's what keeps you going. If you don't have hope, you can't move forward. If you don't have hope, you can't go on. And the Christian faith is the only faith I know of that presents us with the possibility of infinite, eternal hope. And we find it here in this meal, in which we remember that now, no matter how lost we might be, God will bring us back. No matter how much we have lost our peace and joy, when we start serving others and forgetting about ourselves, we will find peace and joy. And then no matter how many last days we face, we will be raised up. And that is the message for today. Amen.